A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. What did James Bond, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and a 1970s British science fiction show have in common? Aside from a lot of questionable special effects over the decades, they all absolutely refuse to die gracefully. It is a phenomenon we see everywhere in 2026, and frankly, it is getting a bit exhausting. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the 8 most drawn-out series of all time, spanning everything from classic literature to those mind-numbing docuseries you only watch because you are trapped on a 10-hour flight to London.
It is a great prompt because it forces us to distinguish between a long-running success and a zombie franchise. I am Herman Poppleberry, and I have spent way too much time looking at the data on this. There is a specific point in a series' life cycle where the creative engine stalls, but the commercial momentum just keeps the car rolling down the hill. We are ranking these from mildly excessive to painfully eternal. By the way, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash.
I love that we are using an AI to discuss the creative bankruptcy of human-made franchises. There is a certain poetic irony there. But before we dive into the list, Herman, how are we actually defining drawn out? Because some things, like The Simpsons, have been on forever, but they still have a massive, if different, audience.
To me, a drawn-out series is one where the quality has hit the floor. The original creative vision is a distant memory, and the only reason it still exists is because it is a safe bet for a spreadsheet somewhere. It is about that gap between people are enjoying this, and this is being produced because the IP is too valuable to let sit idle. It is the difference between a story that needs to be told and a brand that needs to be serviced.
It is the content versus art distinction, essentially. When a show becomes a vertical, or a pillar of the streaming strategy, instead of a story about a guy who solves crimes. But how do you measure that? Is there a specific metric you look at in the data that screams, this should have ended 3 years ago?
Usually, it's the diminishing returns of complexity. In the beginning, a series adds layers to its world. Around the midpoint, it starts repeating those layers. By the end, it's just rearranging the furniture. You see it in the script density. The dialogue gets shorter, the tropes get louder, and the previously on segments get longer because the writers assume the audience has a 5-minute memory.
It's like a star that's run out of hydrogen and starts burning heavier elements. It gets bigger and redder, but it's actually dying. Alright, let's start the countdown. We are at number 8, and we are looking at the world of literature. Specifically, a guy who never seems to buy a new toothbrush.
Number 8 is the Jack Reacher series by Lee Child. Now look, the first dozen books are fantastic thrillers. They are tight, they are logical, and Reacher is a fascinating, stoic force of nature. But we are now at over 25 books, and the formula has become so rigid it is almost structural engineering. Reacher hitchhikes into a town, finds a problem, drinks some coffee, hits some people, and leaves.
I read one of the later ones recently. I think it was book 22 or something, and I genuinely couldn't remember if I'd read it before. It is like the literary equivalent of a procedural television show, which is fine if you just want comfort food. But at what point does the author just say, I have explored every possible way this man can break a person's elbow?
That is the thing. Around book 15, which was The Enemy, you could see the shift. The plot started relying on increasingly improbable coincidences even for a thriller. Reacher just happens to walk into the one town in America where a secret government conspiracy is unfolding in a diner. Every single time, it's the small world problem. If the world is that small, why does he need to hitchhike?
It's also the physical toll. In the early books, Reacher is a tank, but he's a human tank. By book 20, he's essentially a mythological creature. He doesn't just win fights, he dismantles physics. I remember a scene where he basically predicts the trajectory of a bullet by feeling the wind on his earlobe. It's moving away from gritty realism into superhero fan fiction.
But because the character is so iconic and the one-man justice trope is so profitable, it just keeps going. It is a content factory. Lee Child even retired and handed the reins to his brother Andrew, which is the ultimate sign of a franchise refusing to end. It is literally being kept in the family to ensure the biannual release schedule never slips.
It is the ship of Theseus of thriller novels. If you change the author and the plot is just a remix of book 4, is it even the same series? Or is it just a brand name on a dust jacket? Does the data show a drop-off in readership when the authorship changed?
Interestingly, no. The brand loyalty for Reacher is massive. People don't buy the book for the prose, they buy it for the Reacher moment. That specific beat where he tells a bad guy, I'm going to count to 3, and then hits him at 2. As long as that beat exists, the spreadsheet stays green.
It's a literal Pavlovian response for dads in airports, and that leads us perfectly into number 7, which is the television equivalent of a Reacher novel, Law and Order, Special Victims Unit. We are talking 26 seasons and counting. It has outlasted the original show, multiple spin-offs, and probably several of the actual laws it depicts.
I have a theory that SVU is actually a psychological experiment to see how many times you can hear that dun-dun sound effect before your brain turns into mush. It turned into a soap opera with crime scenes years ago.
I think I've seen every episode of the first 10 seasons, and back then, it was about the case. Now, it feels like it's 80% Olivia Benson's personal life and 20% a crime that gets solved by a convenient DNA match in the last 5 minutes.
The data on this is actually quite stark. If you look at the viewership metrics, season 12 back in 2010 was a massive inflection point. They lost Chris Maloney, the chemistry shifted, and viewership dropped 30% in a single season. Most shows would be looking for an exit strategy at that point. Instead, SVU leaned into being a legacy brand. It became a reliable filler for NBC's schedule. The storytelling became incredibly repetitive. How many times can Olivia Benson be personally traumatized by a case?
But wait, how does the show actually sustain itself if the viewership dropped that much? Is it just that the production cost is so low compared to a prestige drama?
Partially, yes. But it's also the syndication loophole. SVU is the ultimate second screen show. Because it's a procedural, you can watch an episode from season 4, then one from season 22, and you don't really lose the thread. It's built to be sliced and diced for cable marathons. The show isn't being written for a cohesive narrative journey anymore. It's being written to provide 42-minute blocks of content that can be sold to Ion Television or USA Network in perpetuity.
At this point, I think she has more trauma than the entire city of New York combined. She's been kidnapped, held at gunpoint, framed, and survived about 15 different internal affairs investigations. If this were a real person, they wouldn't be a police captain. They'd be in a permanent state of catatonia. But it stays on because it is safe. It is what people watch in hotel rooms when they don't want to think.
It's the passive consumption king. The ratings stay steady not because it's appointment viewing, but because it's the default. If you turn on a TV in a hospital waiting room or a gym, there is a 40% chance SVU is playing. It's environmental noise. It doesn't challenge you, it just occupies 42 minutes of your life. It is the television version of a weighted blanket, except the blanket is made of grim police reports.
Do you think they'll ever end it? Or is Mariska Hargitay just going to be solving crimes from a retirement home in season 50?
As long as the syndication checks keep clearing, she'll be there. It's procedural inertia. And that brings us to number 6, which moved from street racing movie to superhero franchise without anyone asking, the Fast and Furious franchise. We are at 11 main films now, plus spin-offs.
I stopped being able to defend these movies when they went to space in a Pontiac Fiero. I think that was Fast 9. By that point, the family theme had been repeated so many times it sounded like a cult mantra. It's gone from I live my life a quarter mile at a time to I live my life ignoring the laws of gravity and common sense.
Fast X in 23 and Fast 11 in 25 have been the clearest examples of creative bankruptcy I have ever seen in big budget cinema. The stunts are no longer impressive because there are no stakes. Everyone is essentially invincible. They have resurrected so many dead characters that the concept of mortality has vanished from the universe. When a franchise loses the ability to kill off characters because they might need them for a spin-off in 2029, you know it is drawn out.
But isn't there something to be said for the spectacle? I mean, people aren't going to Fast and Furious for the Shakespearean dialogue. They go to see a car jump out of a plane. Does the data show that the audience actually cares about the family plot? Or are they just there for the explosions?
The data suggests they are there for the escalation. But escalation has a ceiling. In the early films, the stakes were, can we steal these DVD players? Then it was, can we stop a drug lord? Then can we stop a nuclear submarine? Once you've stopped a submarine with a Dodge Charger, where do you go? You go to space. Once you've been to space, you've hit the literal ceiling of the physical world. Anything after that feels like a lateral move. That's why Fast X felt so hollow. It was just more of what we'd already seen, but louder.
It's the soap operification of action. Oh, you thought Han died in a fiery explosion? No, he was actually in a secret bunker in Tokyo eating chips for 5 years. It's spectacular, sure, but it is empty. The budget for these things is now over $300 million per movie. Yet the scripts feel like they were written by a teenager playing with action figures.
And then the car jumps between 3 skyscrapers. And then Jason Momoa licks a bomb. The audience fatigue is showing too. Fast X underperformed domestically compared to the earlier peaks. People are finally getting full on the family barbecue. But the international markets, specifically China and Brazil, still love the spectacle, so the machine keeps grinding.
It's a self-parodying loop. They can't go back to street racing because the scale is too small, but they can't go bigger because they have already been to orbit. What's left? Time travel? A crossover with Jurassic Park.
Don't give them ideas, Korn. Universal owns both. We are one boardroom meeting away from Vin Diesel drag racing the T-Rex. Speaking of lingering, let's talk about the Long Haul Flight special. Number 5 on our list, Netflix's formulaic true crime docuseries X. I am using X as a placeholder, but honestly, you could plug in any of them from the last 3 years. Netflix just announced the 10th season of one of these in February 26, and I don't think a single person on Earth could tell you the plot of season 7.
This is a fascinating modern phenomenon. These are low-cost, high-volume productions. They all have the same drone shots of a misty forest, the same slow-motion recreations of someone walking toward a door, and the same ominous cello music. They are designed by an algorithm to be bingeable, but entirely forgettable.
It's the padding that gets me. They take a story that could be a very tight 90-minute documentary and stretch it into 8 episodes. They spend 20 minutes of episode 4 just interviewing a neighbor who once saw the suspect buy a bagel. It adds nothing to the narrative, but it adds minutes watched to the platform's quarterly report.
How do they get away with that, though? Surely the audience notices when an entire episode is just vibes and no new information.
It's called micro-hooking. They end every 12-minute segment before a potential ad break or a next episode prompt with a piece of information that sounds like a revelation, even if it's ultimately irrelevant. But then, the detectives found a blue suitcase. Then you watch the next 10 minutes and realize the suitcase was empty and belonged to the victim's aunt. It's a narrative shell game. The goal isn't to inform you, it's to prevent you from closing the tab.
I was on a flight to Tel Aviv last month, and the guy next to me watched 4 episodes of a docu-series about a tax fraud scheme from the 90s. He wasn't even looking at the screen half the time. He just needed the talking heads to provide a rhythmic background to his nap. It's the digital version of white noise.
That is precisely why they are drawn out. Netflix doesn't care if the story is good in a traditional sense. They care about retention. If they can keep you clicking, next episode, because of a manufactured cliffhanger, they win. It is the docu-bloat era. It is creative stretching to the point of transparency.
It is the ultimate cynical use of technology and art. We have the data that shows people stop watching after 40 minutes, so we will put a cliffhanger every 39 minutes, regardless of whether anything actually happened. It is a series that exists purely because the true crime category on the home screen needs fresh thumbnails. Is there any sign of this slowing down?
Actually, the opposite. AI generation is making these even cheaper to produce. We're seeing season 12 of shows where the reenactments are partially AI generated to save on location costs. It's a content treadmill. And now we're moving into the top 4. This is where we get into the truly painful examples, the ones where the quality went into the bunker and never came out, yet the machines keep churning.
I'm ready. Let's get into the heavy hitters.
Number 4. The Walking Dead Universe. This one is a masterclass in how to kill a premise through overexposure. The main show went on for 11 seasons, which was already about 5 seasons too many. By the time they reached the Commonwealth arc, the stakes of the zombie apocalypse had been completely diluted.
The problem with The Walking Dead was that it became a show about people walking through the woods and having the same argument about who we are now for a decade. We have to survive. But at what cost? Rinse and repeat. It's like the writers forgot that the zombies were supposed to be the threat. Eventually, the zombies just became a mild inconvenience, like a swarm of gnats.
And then, instead of letting it die, they birthed a dozen spin-offs. That is the drawn-out part. You have Dead City, Daryl Dixon, The Ones Who Live. They are literally slicing the original cast into separate shows to keep the AMC brand alive. In 2024 and 2025, they were launching new seasons of spin-offs for a show that had already peaked in 2014.
But wait, how do they justify these spin-offs if the main show was already losing steam? Is there actually a demand for Daryl in France?
It's about fan base fragmentation. AMC realized they couldn't get 17 million people to watch one show anymore, but they could get 2 million die-hard fans to watch 4 different shows. It's a long-tail strategy. If you own the IP outright, it's cheaper to make a spin-off with a pre-existing audience than to launch a brand new show from scratch. The problem is that it turns the story into a chore. You're not watching a journey, you're watching a franchise maintenance plan.
It's the franchise fragmentation strategy. Instead of one big show that costs a lot to produce, you have 4 smaller shows that target specific fan bases, but it dilutes the brand. If everyone is a protagonist in their own show, no one is in danger. The Walking Dead has become a content factory, where the only thing that actually dies is the audience's interest.
It is a zombie franchise about zombies. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a Michonne katana. The audience has moved on. The ratings for the spin-offs are a fraction of what the main show had at its height. But because it is a proven IP, they just keep digging up the corpse. It's the franchise inertia we talked about. And that leads us to a very prestigious number 3, the James Bond film franchise. 25 official films since 1962.
Now, wait a minute, Herman. Bond is an institution. You can't call Bond drawn out in the same way as a Netflix docuseries. It's a cultural touchstone. It survived the Cold War, the rise of the internet, and about 6 different fashion eras.
Why not? The model is essentially reboot every decade. We just finished the Daniel Craig era in 2021 with No Time to Die, which was arguably a very drawn-out conclusion itself. It took forever to get made and then sat on a shelf during the pandemic. And here we are in March 2026, and the rumors about the next Bond are still swirling. The same tropes are being polished up, and the same Bond girl and shaken not stirred beats are being prepared for a new generation.
But isn't the iteration the point of Bond? It is like a myth that gets retold. Each Bond reflects the era he's in. Craig was the post-9/11 gritty Bond. Brosnan was the slick 90s tech Bond.
To an extent, yes. But look at the creative struggle of the last few films. They keep trying to give Bond a dark, gritty origin or a deep emotional arc, but at the end of the day, he has to be a guy in a suit who blows things up. They are running out of ways to make that interesting. The Spectre plot was a mess of forced connections to previous films because they felt they had to have a cinematic universe feel. It is a 64-year-old property that is being kept on life support by product placement and nostalgia.
But if they stop making Bond, wouldn't that leave a massive hole in the gentleman spy genre? Is there anyone else doing it better?
That's the monopoly of genre problem. Because Bond is so big, no one else can make a straightforward spy movie without it being compared to Bond, so the genre itself gets stagnant. We're stuck with Bond because the industry is too afraid to invest in a newest spy. We'd rather see the 26th iteration of a 1950s literary character than a modern take on espionage that doesn't involve a tuxedo and an Aston Martin. It's creative safety disguised as tradition.
I guess I see your point. When the most exciting thing about a new Bond movie is the announcement of who is designing the watch he wears, maybe the creative well is a bit dry. It is a series that continues because it is a British cultural export, not necessarily because someone has a brilliant new spy story to tell. But what about the Bond is a codename theory? That's how fans justify the longevity.
That theory is a coping mechanism for a franchise that doesn't want to admit it's a repetitive loop. If the character doesn't age or evolve in a meaningful way across 60 years, it's not a character, it's an icon. And icons are great for selling cologne, but they are terrible for narrative tension. Speaking of cinematic universes, we have to talk about number 2, the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Oh boy, here we go. The superhero fatigue talk. I feel like we've been talking about this since 2015, yet the movies keep making billions.
It isn't just fatigue corn. It is a systematic decline. Post-Endgame in 2019, the MCU should have taken a 5-year hiatus. Instead, they tripled the output. We have had over 30 films and 10 series now. Phase 5 and 6 are announced through 2027. But look at 2024 and 2025. The Marvels underperformed massively. The Disney Plus shows are being reevaluated because the quality drop-off was so steep.
It became homework. That was the problem. You couldn't watch a movie without having seen 3 TV shows and a holiday special. It stopped being a series of movies and started being a mandatory subscription to a lifestyle. If I have to watch 6 hours of Loki to understand why a portal opened in Doctor Strange, I'm not being entertained. I'm being managed.
And that is the definition of drawn out. They are producing content to satisfy a release schedule, not to tell a compelling story. When you are making a Thunderbolts movie or an Agatha Harkness spinoff, you are scraping the bottom of the barrel. The 2025 metrics showed that the general audience, the people who aren't die-hard comic fans, has largely checked out. Yet, the machine is so big, with so much money already sunk into future phases, that they can't stop. It is a super tanker that has lost its engine but is still moving toward the shore.
But what about the multiverse as a solution? Doesn't that allow them to bring in fresh faces and alternate versions of characters?
The multiverse is actually the ultimate drawn-out tool because it removes all consequences. If a character dies, you just go to Universe 616 and grab a different version of them. It destroys the emotional weight of the narrative. Why should I care about a hero's sacrifice if they can be replaced in the next scene by a version of themselves from a world where everyone is made of paint? It's a desperate attempt to keep the IP relevant by cannibalizing its own history.
Do you think they'll ever do a hard reboot? Just wipe the slate clean and start with a new Iron Man in 10 years.
They'll have to. But the current multiverse arc is their attempt to have their cake and eat it too, bringing back old actors for nostalgia while trying to introduce new ones. It's messy, it's confusing, and it reeks of desperation. It is the ultimate corporate version of art, which brings us to number 1. The undisputed king of being drawn out.
I knew you were going to say this, and as a fan of the show, it hurts, but I can't argue with the logic. Number 1, Doctor Who. 63 years. 26 seasons of the classic era. 14 seasons of the modern era. Plus countless spin-offs, specials, and audio dramas.
Look, I love the Doctor, but the show's entire premise, regeneration, is a literal get-out-of-jail-free card for ending a series. Whenever it gets stale, they just swap the lead actor and the showrunner and pretend it is a fresh start. But the lore has become so bloated and contradictory that even the hardcore fans argue about what is canon.
But Herman, isn't the fact that it can't change its lead actor its greatest strength? It's the only show that has a built-in mechanism to stay young forever. How can you call that drawn out when it's designed for longevity?
Because longevity isn't the same as vitality. Just because you can keep going doesn't mean you should. By staying on air for 60 years, the show has eventually hit every possible trope. They've saved the world from the Daleks so many times that the Daleks aren't scary anymore, they're just nostalgic icons. The show has become a museum of its own history. Every new season feels like it's in conversation with a season from 1974 rather than trying to be something genuinely new for 2026.
The 2023 60 anniversary specials were a huge hit, drawing 10 million viewers, but then the regular season viewership dropped right back down. It is a special event show that is trying to survive as a weekly procedural. It is a 60-year-old property that has been rebooted so many times, it is starting to look like a glitch in the Matrix.
It is the ultimate drawn-out series because it has no natural endpoint. It can, theoretically, go on forever, and that is terrifying from a creative standpoint. If a story never ends, does it ever really matter? If the Doctor can always just regenerate, and the universe can always be reset, where is the weight?
But isn't that the magic of it? The idea that there's always a new adventure? It's a show about change.
Is it though? Or is it a show about the solution of change? No matter who plays the Doctor, they eventually fight the Daleks, they eventually save Earth, and they eventually run down a corridor. After 60 years, those corridors are starting to look very familiar. It has become a cultural monument that we keep around because it is part of the furniture, not because it is consistently good television. It's the elder statesman of the zombie franchise.
You know, Corn, looking at this list, I have a sudden dark realization.
What's that?
We are on episode 1705 of My Weird Prompts. I really hope we don't end up on this list one day. The two brothers who kept talking about AI and sloths until the year 2040, long after their listeners had uploaded their consciousness to the cloud.
Don't worry, Herman. The moment I see you start repeating your Jack Reacher rant for the 5th time in a month, I'm pulling the plug. We'll go out like a limited series on HBO, short, impactful, and leaving people wanting more. Unlike formulaic true crime documentaries XT.
I appreciate that. But seriously, how does a creator know when to stop? If you're making millions of dollars, the incentive to keep going is almost impossible to resist.
It requires a sacrificial integrity. You have to value the legacy of the work more than the current paycheck. Look at Bill Watterson with Calvin and Hobbes. He walked away at the absolute height of his fame because he knew he'd said everything he had to say. That's rare. Most people just keep milking the cow until the cow is a skeleton.
But how do you apply that to a collaborative project like a TV show, where hundreds of people's jobs depend on the series continuing? Is it selfish for a creator to end a show if it puts the crew out of work?
That's the industrial guilt trap. Yes, jobs are important, but using employment as a justification for creative stagnation is how you end up with season 30 of a show that nobody actually likes. The solution is to foster an industry where new SCOs are given the same resources as the old ones. If the SVU budget went toward 3 new, innovative pilots every year, the crew would still have jobs and the audience would have something better to watch. We've traded innovation for job security in the arts, and the result is the list we just read.
So, what are the actual takeaways here for the people listening who aren't currently producing a 26-season police procedural?
I think the first big takeaway is for creators. Recognize the sincerity threshold. There is a point where you stop making something because you believe in it and start making it because it is your job. If you are a writer or a developer, you have to monitor your own engagement. If you are bored with the project, the audience will be too. Metrics like minutes watched are a trap. They measure persistence, not passion.
And for the consumers, the takeaway is to be more intentional with your time budget. We have tools now, things like JustWatch or Tracked, that can show you the quality trend of a series. If you see the IMDb ratings for a show start to slide consistently after season 4, maybe don't start season 5. Don't fall for the sunk cost fallacy just because you've watched 40 hours of something. You don't owe a franchise your loyalty if they aren't giving you quality in return.
Support original finite stories. When a show like Breaking Bad or Succession ends when it is supposed to, celebrate that. It is a rare act of creative courage in an era of infinite content. Demand transparency from streaming platforms too. If we knew how many people were actually watching versus just having it on in the background, the industry might shift back toward engagement over volume.
It is about reclaiming the value of an ending. An ending gives a story meaning. Without it, you just have a sequence of events. If a story doesn't have a destination, it's just a commute.
Well, on that note, we should probably end this before we become the very thing we are critiquing. Big thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping us on track.
And a huge thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that make this whole operation possible.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you are enjoying the show and you aren't just using us as background noise for a flight, a quick review on your podcast app really helps us out. You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive.
Will we still be doing this in 2030? Only if the prompts stay weird.
Stay curious, everyone.
See ya. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and